For the first time all series, Victor Wembanyama looked like the best player on the floor, and the Spurs avoided a dreaded 0-3 finals deficit, snapped the New York Knicks' playoff winning streak, and suddenly looks like a series that is going to be a little bit more even. What looked like a Knicks coronation is now going to be a series again, and I think just off top, I think we got to just talk about Victor Wembanyama finally taking over the series. He had 32 points, 8 boards, 6 assists, and he scored 10 points in the first quarter, which I think really started off the game very strongly for the San Antonio Spurs, including 2 dunks, which I think he was really fiending for because he just wasn't able to get to the basket as often against the New York Knicks in the first 2 games. He really did respond after some costly mistakes in game 2, and I think attacking early instead of settling was what really set the tone for the San Antonio Spurs team as he looked far more aggressive from the opening tip. I think in game 1 and 2, you saw that Wemby kind of floated around the perimeter, and the Knicks really dictated when he did get the ball. But in game 3, Wemby dictated everything. Started the game with back-to-back dunks, as I said, established the physicality immediately. And I think this wasn't just a great Wembanyama game. I think this was the first game where he looked like an NBA Finals superstar. I wanted to ask you guys, was this Wemby's arrival moment for this series, or do you think he needs to do it again in game 4? Let's start with Sergio.
Yeah, I think he kind of finally settled in to the pressure of the finals, and I think he couldn't have done it in a better place in Madison Square Garden in New York with all the pressure facing you down 2-0. I think that he has arrived. I would like to see him do it one more time, but we all know that he's capable of doing that. He looked great out there. His defense was on par with what we're used to seeing out of him, and he wasn't afraid to go and score, and make plays and get those shots up that he usually does. That I think what really kind of catapulted this was his miss in the final seconds of game 2. I think he really kind of looked at himself and was like, I can't let opportunities like that just get past me. So we saw the Wemby that we're used to seeing.
Yeah. Daniel?
Yeah, so I do think this was his moment. This was his game. I think this was what turns around Spurs and what they can do this series. But I do think we need this every game, and this isn't just a one-time thing. I think game 4, this needs to happen again. He needs to be the leader. He's always been this team's leader no matter what. And so going into game 4, they just need to have the same mentality. He needs to have the same mentality that hey, I don't feel this pressure anymore. I've been here now. I've been here for 3 games. I know what this feels like.
Yeah, and I think despite all of the notions that he's having a bad series, I think he's still averaging around 29 points per game and 10 rebounds. And so, we can say it's an off day for Wemby, but yesterday I think really solidified what kind of player he can be when he is playing his peak. And I do agree. I think at this point, Wemby needs to show up like this in every game, right? Because it's 3 games, you're down 2-1, you got to win 3 out of the next 4. I do agree that I think Wemby needs to do this again. The other thing I really liked out of the Spurs in this game, I think the supporting cast finally showed up big. Stephon Castle scored 23 points, and Dylan Harper I thought was a real lightning bolt off the bench for this team. Had a couple of big buckets in that first half. I think the biggest of which, De'Aaron Fox, I think hitting that shot late in that game to extend the lead to a 2-possession lead. For a guy that's been scrutinized so much, he needs to come up in moments like this, being a former clutch player of the year, and you paid him all that money, and I think that those are the type of moments that you pay De'Aaron Fox for. The Spurs really built and maintained multiple leads, but even when they lost the lead in that second quarter, an amazing third quarter ripped it, or flipped it, I should say, right back in their favor. And so that was really impressive because they didn't just rely on Victor Wembanyama. And I think for most of the series, Brunson, had help, Towns had help, and Anunoby had help. But now I think Castle stepping up is big for them, and Fox delivering in crunch time is big for them. And I think the turning point for this game, especially, was that Stephon Castle 3-pointer with under 2 minutes left in the game to push the lead to 7. Even though the Knicks were, hitting crazy 3-pointers coming back, I think that Castle 3-pointer really solidified that lead for them towards the end of that game. And that shot effectively saved San Antonio's season. Again, I think San Antonio doesn't need Castle to be a star every night. They just really need somebody besides Wemby to show up. And I think moving forward, which player do you guys think is going to have the biggest impact as a second player that has a good performance for the rest of the series? Is that De'Aaron Fox, or do you think it's more of a guy like Stephon Castle?
I think it's more of a guy like Stephon Castle. I mean, he showed exactly why he should be that second option in last night's game. I believe he had 18 points just in the first half alone, which is
there was a bucket
crazy.
that he had over Karl Anthony Towns, over Josh Hart, and I forgot the other defender. He got fouled twice, maybe even 3 times on that play, and they did not even call a foul, which I was like, I don't know how that went in.
Yeah, the refs were a whole different conversation in that game. But I think Stephon Castle, I mean, we've talked about, how young he is too, but he's been in these moments before. He went to UConn. So I think he could absolutely continue to be that second option for the Spurs and provide some relief for Wemby if need be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it could be either or with Steven Castle or De'Aaron Fox, but I think to me it would be De'Aaron Fox because just his veteran status and what he brings to this team. Yeah, like they they're already in the finals, but having that veteran status, especially in moments like this, is always going to be great just to help keep your cool down. And I think we saw in game two what De'Aaron Fox can do as a second as a second man because
Yeah.
he was that guy in game two. Obviously things
Hmm.
didn't go their way game two, but he was still there and he put up a great game. And to have more of that from De'Aaron, I think that's what helps propel this Spurs team to a comeback.
I also think when I look at like who needs to be a better second option, I think a down, quote unquote down game from Stephon Castle is still much better than a down game from De'Aaron Fox. So I think I need De'Aaron Fox to be a lot more of that second guy. Not only because you paid him to be that, but also I think it's just necessary for this team to have a better performance out of a De'Aaron Fox. The other big thing, the Knicks, they finally looked vulnerable. This is their first loss in 46 days. Like, that is a crazy stat. A 13-game
Absurd.
playoff winning streak snapped. This is the first finals game since 1999 for them that has ended in disappointment. And I think the biggest stories from this, Karl Anthony Towns just being held to 11 points, and then Mikal Bridges, who battled foul trouble, along with Jalen Brunson, who also battled foul trouble all game long. The Knicks, I think, had been surviving imperfect performances because somebody always stepped up towards the end of the game, or the Spurs kind of just shot themselves in the foot. And I think that was kind of the case in game two. But in game three, Towns disappeared. Bridges, I thought, was really limited. And then Brunson and Anunoby had to carry way too much of the weight. Anunoby had a great first half, had a couple of threes in that second half. And Brunson obviously played to the highest of his abilities, but they need a lot more out of Karl Anthony Towns, in my opinion. And for the first time all postseason, the Knicks really looked human. Do you guys think this is like simply one bad game, or have the Spurs really figured out how to beat this team?
I think the Spurs have kind of figured out a formula a little bit. I mean, they figured out to limit Towns. I mean, Mikal Bridges couldn't get anything going. And the Spurs kind of played very physical. The Knicks were getting beat up, and I know there's some fouls that should have been called on the Spurs in some parts of the game, but like I said before, the refs are a whole another conversation on both sides of the ball, or for both teams rather. But I think they figured something out. OG Anunoby has his role, and I think he played great, but I don't think he should be, your number two scorer in that game, like, at all. So, yeah, I think the Spurs have figured something out here.
Yeah, when I looked at it, I think it's a bit of both. I think the Spurs are really starting to figure something out, but I think it also came down to just some bad luck and a bad night for Knicks as well. Because if you look at it, there were a lot of moments where, yeah, there were these dodgy calls that could have swung, points into favor of New York. And just that alone to me help like it convinces me that yeah, the Spurs are figuring something out, but there was also a lot of points just being left on the board because of calls not going your way. And I think that is something that is very important. Even even if you want to argue like, oh, Spurs were also not getting good calls. Either way, it's like these are still points being left on the board just because some something's not being called. Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, you're still muted.
You're still muted.
Tanvir, you're muted.
You're still muted.
Okay, I
There
don't
you
know
go.
why I was still muted. Um, yeah, as I was gonna say, the Spurs shot 24 free throws. Just to kind of segue into this officiating storyline, the Spurs shot 24 free throws in the second half. The Knicks only shot 8. And obviously Mike Brown openly questioned the whistle after the game. I think it is a debate to be had. Did the officials have an impact in the outcome, or are the Knicks kind of just making excuses after finally losing a game? I think for me personally, even with the free throw disparity, Spurs leading most of the night, Castle and Fox making winning plays towards the end of that game, but also the horrible shooting from the three-point line, especially in that fourth quarter from the Knicks. I think that's mainly the reason why this team lost the game. I think for me personally, yes, I think the push on Brunson by Wemby should have been a flagrant. And there could be a couple of calls that go one way or the other. I obviously listed the Stephon Castle play in that first half. I think that the Spurs driving to the basket as much as they do compared to the Knicks is the reason for that disparity. And I truly do think that with the Spurs getting that free throw disparity, a lot of it is because of that, not necessarily because they're just missing calls on one side or the other. And I just still think the Spurs made the winning plays at the end of the game, and I don't think it was too much of an officiating conversation besides that Wemby push on Brunson, which I do agree should have been a foul on him. I think that should have been free throws in a possession for sure. But beyond that, I think the officiating didn't necessarily overshadow the game for me personally. I don't know if it did for you guys.
Yeah, I think.
There was only or
No, go
you
ahead. Go ahead.
okay. There was one moment in the game where I think it was late in the fourth. I think it was a drive killer. It was when the Spurs were waiting to challenge a play, but they were waiting to see more replays on it in the arena. And so when they were
Oh,
waiting,
but they also restarted the game without the referee's discretion. That was the other thing. And so like you
that
can't really it's like a free kick, or yeah, it's like a free kick, but like
yeah.
you do it right off, when in reality like
Mhm,
there still needs to be a card given out. So
mhm.
I think that's kind of how I interpret that call.
I think I was mostly just confused at first because just the way I was watching
For
the
sure.
game.
Yeah.
So I was like, I didn't really know what was going on. So when I just saw they were subbing, I was like, okay, like as soon as the sub goes through, he's free to play, like free
Yeah.
to inbound the ball. So that
That
was my main thing.
that was also a really weird play because like Brunson hit it off of like Brunson went out of bounds, hit it off of
Yeah.
Vassell, but it didn't go out of bounds. So I was just confused why that wasn't just Spurs possession. But if the referee blew the whistle, that should have been Spurs possession anyway, because that he's indicating then that unless he's indicating a foul, which he wasn't, he's just indicating that he's out of bounds, and so that should be Spurs ball. That's why I was confused. Regardless of that being wrong or right, I also think that that's pretty like inconsistent from the refereeing, and that goes to show you. I think that the referees weren't great all night from both sides.
Yeah.
I do agree with that part. I don't know how much of it was to the point where that's the reason the Spurs won. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sergio, do you have any thoughts on that before we move forward?
Yeah, I think the refs do have an impact on the game to a certain extent, but it's kind of like you said, like it only can affect it so much before it becomes a question of who just performed better. Calls were going both ways. There was a stretch, I think, in the third or fourth quarter, I don't remember which one, where both teams challenged like 2 plays each. Like it would happen consecutively.
Yeah.
So like the refs weren't good at all during the game on either side of the ball. So I mean, it just came out to who could overcome those obstacles better. And last night it was the Spurs.
Also, I will say with the free throw disparity, the Spurs went into the bonus so early in the quarter because of the early fouls in that fourth quarter, which allowed them to shoot those free throws later in that quarter to an extent. So, again, I'm not trying to sit here and absolve the refereeing, because I do think a lot of it was bad. But I also think that it didn't necessarily change the game to the point where that was the reason the Spurs won, you know? But moving forward, I think the pressure has completely flipped in this series. Before Game 3, I think the Spurs really were in must-win territory, and the Knicks were one way from effectively ending this series, but now the Spurs have momentum. They're going to be back home for at least one more game, and the Knicks have some real questions to face. I think Game 4 may be the biggest game of this entire finals. I think that's what we say about every game from this point on. A Knicks win is going to make it 3-1, which only one team in NBA history has come back from a 3-1 deficit. And a Spurs win is going to make this a best of 3, with 2 of those games being in San Antonio. So I think the storylines that I'm really looking forward to in Game 4, 1, can Wemby repeat what he did in Game 3? Everyone expected a response. Can he dominate twice? The second thing, can Karl Anthony Towns bounce back? 11 points is not enough from Karl Anthony Towns. Refs and all, that guy has to be better from three-point range, but just in general in the scoring department. The Knicks need their second star, and he has to come up big in Game 4. And then the third question is, who wins the momentum battle? I think the Garden atmosphere kind of felt like a championship celebration even before tip-off. They felt like this series is over. They're going to sweep the Spurs. But now, with this loss, I think the pressure is back onto the Knicks here. And I don't know why we have a fourth Sergio in this call. I don't know what that happened, but regardless of that, I think the Spurs didn't just win Game 3. They changed the conversation. And for 2 games, this looked like the Knicks championship to lose. And then Victor Wembanyama reminded everyone why he's the most young, terrifying player in basketball. The finals aren't over, in my opinion. I think they've just started. And I think Game 4 is going to be a real key indicator for the series in the future. Before I ask everybody else, what is more likely to you guys? The Knicks win in 5 or the Spurs win in 6?
I think,
because for me, I would probably say the Knicks win in 5 is still more likely, because I think that there is a certain atmosphere still with MSG that with this punch in the mouth from the Spurs, they would most likely respond. But I think the Spurs have shown now that they can certainly come back and win this series. I still think the Knicks in 5 is more likely than Spurs in 6.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go towards. I think, like, statistically speaking, like, I think Knicks in 5 is, like, more likely to happen. But what I want to happen is the Spurs to win again, so I keep watching this NBA Finals.
Yeah. It has been a crazy one. Daniel, what do you think? Knicks in 5 or Spurs in 6?
I think it's Knicks in 5. Just with the way momentum can go. If the Knicks go and win tomorrow, I think just the way momentum would lead going back to San Antonio. It's like they've already won their first 2 there. What makes them think they can't finish the series there?
For sure. Yeah. I think that there is a certain aspect to San Antonio with their backs against the wall, which we've seen over these last couple of series, especially versus Minnesota and OKC. And I think it would be difficult for the Knicks to win in 5. I think realistically, Knicks in 6 is probably the most likely option out of everything that's going to be going on over these next couple of games. But you never know. I think the Knicks, it's all in how they respond. I think if they lose game 4, I think they're going to lose this series. I just think that with San Antonio having 2 of the last 3 games, I don't see the Knicks beating the Spurs in game 5 and game 6. I just don't see that. And so I think this series will go to 7 and the Spurs will win at that point, because I think that much of the Spurs beating the Knicks twice in MSG, and they should have won game 2 in San Antonio. Just a terrible play by Wemby. But again, I'll ask you guys in the audience, please comment down below, what's more likely, the Knicks win the title in 5 games or the Spurs complete the comeback and win the championship?